Hello, everybody, and welcome to Angloville's 7th live webinar. We will get started in just a few minutes' time, so please get yourself settled down. Feel free to introduce yourself into the chat. Leave us a comment with who you are, where you are maybe, and we'll start in 2 or 3 minutes' time. If you're just joining us, welcome. This is Angloville's live webinar. Thank you for joining us. We're going to get started in maybe 2 minutes' time, so just sit back and relax. And as soon as we are ready to start, we will let you know. Hello to the people who have just joined us, some familiar faces that I recognize from our Angloville programs and some from previous webinars. So you're very, very welcome. Thank you for being here. We'll get started in around 1 minute time. So for now, just sit back and relax. Okay, so welcome to the people who have just joined us. My name is Chris Mayo, and I am the Native Speaker Coordinator Manager here at Angloville. This is our 7th live webinar, so welcome back to those of you who have joined us for previous webinars. For those of you who are new, then let me just introduce myself a little bit more. I'm originally from Manchester in the UK, but now living and working here with Angloville in Poland. And I'm the Native Speaker Coordinator Manager, which means I get to work with our coordinators and native speakers on many, many different programs around Poland. Over the course of today, we will be talking a little bit more about some things that are famous from the UK, some people, some places, some things. So if you've ever visited the UK or studied maybe things about the UK, then maybe you can make some contributions as well. Please feel free during the conversation to leave us some nice messages in the comments. You can send us some questions, and at the end there will be a short opportunity for a live question and answer session. Okay, so let's get going. The first thing I would like to talk about is a very, very famous institution from the UK, which is the royal family. Now, the royal family in the UK is incredibly famous around the world. You will, I'm sure, be aware that there are royal families in many countries, but the one in the UK is known probably as one of the most famous examples. The head is Queen Elizabeth II, and she's a really interesting character for many, many reasons. One of them is that she's been the British monarch now for more than 60 years, and she's the second longest reigning monarch in British history. So that's quite an achievement. She first came to the throne in 1952 on the 6th of February and recently became the oldest ever British monarch that's still serving, outliving her great-great-grandmother. And she's the second longest reigning monarch in the UK. She's also the head not just of the UK, but of 54 countries of the Commonwealth. So all sorts of countries from around the world, which are states that promote human rights, democracy, world peace, those kinds of positive agendas. There's a couple of interesting facts about the Queen specifically as well. For example, did you know she celebrates 2 birthdays? She has her official birthday, which is actually celebrated on different days in different Commonwealth countries, and her actual birthday, the day on which she was born, which is the 21st of April. The 21st of April birthday is generally an event that she shares privately with her family, but big national celebrations are quite common on her official birthday in different countries, with parades and sometimes street parties and those kinds of things. So she's very lucky to have two different birthdays. She's also really famous for wearing incredibly bright coloured clothing. That may sound like a not so interesting point, but actually she's spoken publicly about her reasoning for wearing such brightly coloured clothing. She can often be seen, for example, in lemon yellow colours and bright blues and these kinds of things. And one of the reasons for that is that she can stand out in a crowd. Obviously, she's a very important person, and so when she dresses a little bit differently to other people in some vibrant colours, it really helps her to stand out and be recognised by the people that she is representing and helping. So that's really interesting, I think. I was interested to know if any of you who are watching our webinar today know anything interesting about the royal family from the UK yourselves. Maybe you have a favourite member of the royal family that you're aware of, that you know something about, that you've read something about in the media. If that is the case, please get involved. Send us a message now in the comments and we will try and read out some of your contributions. So if you think you have a favourite member of the British royal family, please let us know, or you think you have a fact or some interesting knowledge about the royal family, then please send us a message. I'll give you a few moments to do so before we take a couple of suggestions. And for all of those of you who have joined us since the beginning, you are very welcome. This is Angloville's webinar about things that are famous from the UK. Feel free to get involved in the comments. Harry and Meghan, yes, Harry and Meghan, they've been in the news a lot in the last 12 months because of their decision to leave official royal duties. So they're a really interesting couple. They've been very widely reported in countries around the world in the last few months. So you may have heard some stories about Harry and Meghan. Okay, what we will do is move on to look at the second very famous thing or person from the UK. This is William Shakespeare, who I am very sure everybody will be aware of. He's been known as England's national poet, but actually he did many things during his time working on various aspects of literature. So he's probably considered the greatest dramatist of all time, regardless of nationality. His works are loved around the world and have been translated into so many different languages. His personal life is still a mystery to many people. He's a bit of an elusive, mysterious character. It's thought that during his lifetime, William Shakespeare wrote around 37 plays that were performed at theatres, and probably more than 150 poems. It's really difficult to be accurate with those numbers because some of the work may have been lost over time. Some was recorded not in writing, but just orally through the oral storytelling tradition. And some of the work perhaps he had some help with, and not everything was attributed to him directly. Obviously, we've all probably seen images of William Shakespeare in the past, and so here's a famous portrait of him. Now, if you have ever visited the UK, then you may have been to his birthplace. If not, and you get an opportunity, I would highly recommend it. He was born in a small town called Stratford-upon-Avon in the year 1564, which is a really beautiful market town. He was one of 8 children, which is, I think, a little known fact. He had a very large family and grew up in a fairly wealthy home. Some of the plays that Shakespeare created have gone on to be famous movies, so you may have seen some of those. One maybe lesser known fact is that the movie The Lion King, both the initial animation from the 1990s and the more recent remake, actually were inspired by William Shakespeare's Hamlet. And if you're familiar with the work of Shakespeare, you may be able to see some of those references in The Lion King. Maybe go back and have a little look. His plays were also really different to how theatre is performed in the sort of modern day world. One of the key differences was that female actors were not used at the time that Shakespeare was writing and producing his plays. So all of the female parts were played by men, which seems a little bit unusual today, but was very common at the time. And the audiences were really, really involved and sometimes quite aggressive and rowdy, and would be very commonly heard shouting and screaming things onto the stage, and sometimes even throwing objects at the performers. So a quick question for you. Do you have a famous Shakespeare play or famous Shakespeare poem? Do you know any other writers perhaps from the UK that are almost as famous as Shakespeare? If you do, then please send us a comment. This is an interactive conversation. We would love you to get involved. So if you can name any Shakespeare plays that you know, that you like, please share them with us. If you can think of any other famous authors or writers, then I'll give you some time to do so in the chat right now. Please feel free to get involved, and welcome to those people who have joined us in the last few minutes. You are very welcome. So I'll give you just a small amount more time. If you would like to get involved, then please give us a suggestion of your famous Shakespeare plays that you particularly enjoy, or maybe tell us some more about some of the writers, authors that you know from the UK. Macbeth is a very, very famous play, known by the actors that perform it as the Scottish play. There is the suggestion that saying the name of the play, Macbeth, whilst performing it is bad luck, so they refer to it as the Scottish play, which is another interesting fact. Midsummer Night's Dream, yes, I remember studying that when I was at school myself. That was, yeah, that's probably one of my first interactions with Shakespeare, actually. That's a good suggestion. Okay then, you can keep the comments coming, of course, as we go on, but for now I will move on to another thing that the UK is particularly famous for, and that is the world of sports. Now, sports are really, really important to many people's lives, of course, around the world, but in the UK in particular, it's a really, really big deal. And actually, many of the world's most popular sports were created and first began in the UK. Examples would include football, or soccer, as some people call it, golf, cricket, rugby and tennis. Now, football is particularly common and popular in the UK, and quite possibly one of the most famous football teams on the planet still is Manchester United. And it just so happens that Manchester United is my personal favourite football team. You may remember I'm from the city of Manchester in the UK, and Manchester United are known around the world as one of the most famous, not just football clubs, but sporting clubs in the world. So another quick question for anybody who would like to get involved. Can you perhaps name any famous British athletes, sports stars, that kind of thing? Or can you think of any sports teams that you watch that are currently based in the UK? If you can think of anyone and would like to share that with us, then please feel free to do so by sending us a message in the comments. And we will give you a little bit of time to do that now. So if you know any famous athletes or particular sports teams that you watch that are based in the UK, feel free to share them with us. At the moment on the screen is the logo for Manchester United, very famous football team and my personal favourite team. Okay, we shall move on to the next famous thing from the UK. If you'd still like to contribute any answers to the previous things we were talking about, feel free to do so. The comments will remain live for the rest of our webinar. So the next thing we'll talk about is some famous landmarks and archaic structures that are popular and well known in the UK. It's got very many famous landmarks, from castles and palaces to strange old structures that have been around for many hundreds and even thousands of years. And one of these that you may have come across before is Stonehenge. Stonehenge is a really interesting circle of incredibly large stones. We're not entirely sure exactly how they appeared in the formation that they do, and it's a really popular tourist attraction in the UK at the moment. If you ever get a chance to visit, it's a really interesting place to spend a nice peaceful afternoon. But of course, there are many other prominent landmarks in the UK. Windsor Castle, for example, is a really, really famous place. King's College in London, Blackpool Tower in the northwest of England, which was a similar structure inspired by the Eiffel Tower in Paris, of course. Hadrian's Wall, which is an amazing old boundary wall that separated England and Scotland, which is a famous walking and cycling route in modern day UK culture. And of course, you may have heard of Buckingham Palace, which is based in the centre of London and is one of the many official residences of the Queen and the royal family, who we talked about a little bit earlier. Yes, editor, yeah, absolutely. Stonehenge is a really interesting place for sure. And because the UK is a pretty small country, many of these landmarks are accessible within a short few-day trip, so it's possible to incorporate many of them. Okay, we shall move on a little bit to talk about a very different aspect perhaps of things that are famous in the UK, and that is the culture of pubs. Now, it may seem that a pub is just like a traditional bar or cafe, maybe a restaurant, but actually it has a kind of slightly different feel and a different atmosphere in the UK. So pubs are short for public houses, and they were initially and originally public meeting places where people would get together and chat and socialise with their friends and share alcoholic and non-alcoholic drinks together. And of course that tradition has been around now in the UK for hundreds and hundreds of years. They're similar to bars, but they have a uniquely British feel to them. One of the things I know that many tourists from the UK, when travelling to other countries, always find very strange is ordering drinks whilst sitting at a table. Because in the UK, people will walk into a pub, they'll go to the bar, they'll ask somebody for a drink, and they'll pay in cash immediately, every time. And that's just one of the many things that separates pub and bar culture in lots of places, I think. Also, another tradition that is customary in the UK is for one person only to pay for a round of drinks. So if I go to the bar with maybe 3 or 4 friends with me, I will buy all 4 drinks maybe together. And then the next time it's time for a top-up, one of our other friends from the group will buy the next round. It's a really, really common trait in UK pub culture. Okay. One of the other things that if you've ever been to the UK, you'll potentially notice is that there is a common theme of naming British pubs with a very traditional, old-sounding name. So there are many pubs called things like the Crown, the Anchor, the King's Arms. Lots of them have very royal connotations. Not all of them, but many, many pubs have that. So you could very easily travel around the UK and see the same pub name in many different towns and cities, even though they're not in any way connected. I wonder if any of you have ever visited the UK and been to a traditional British pub. If you have, let us know. Tell us where you were and how your experiences maybe compare to other establishments like bars you've been to, maybe in Poland. Or do you think there are any British pubs in Poland that you could recommend our audience to visit? And maybe they are the same as the UK pubs, or maybe they're a little bit different. So if you'd like to share one of your ideas with us, please send us a message in the comments, and we will try and read it out if we hear from you. Stonehenge looks a little bit less imposing. Yeah, actually, it's such a famous landmark in the UK, but it isn't really very big. It's very interesting when you get up close, but it's not so big. But it's a nice place to stop on in a summer's afternoon. It's quite a nice location. Before we move on to our next famous UK thing, person or place, if you'd like to share some of your stories about pubs that you may have visited in the UK or elsewhere, then please feel free to share that with us in the chat before we move on. Okay, then I think we shall move on for the time being. Of course, we can always come back to your comments later, should you add them. The next thing that we will talk about is the famous institutions, education institutions in the UK. There are many famous universities, for example, such as Oxford and Cambridge, and other universities like Manchester and Durham, for example, are very famous. But Oxford and Cambridge in particular are really famous institutions. The picture that you can see on your screen at the moment is from the University of Cambridge. You may have seen this image before. It's very famous and has appeared in many famous British movies. In the UK, there are an awful lot of students from around the world. And in London alone, around 400,000 students live at any one time during the student season. So the UK population is massively swelled by students from all over the world. Perhaps some of you have also studied in cities like London or Manchester or Birmingham. But if not, and you are considering studying at some point in the future, the UK has many really, really well-established schools, universities, colleges, so maybe it's a place you could consider. Actually, the education system in the United Kingdom has been ranked as the 6th best in the entire world in global league tables. So that's just another reason why it's a really interesting place to study. So maybe consider it if you are planning to study overseas. The next place that we will talk about is based in London, obviously the capital city, and a very specific attraction called the London Eye, which if you've been to London, I'm sure you will have seen. It's a really, really famous landmark, built by the architectural team of David Marks and Julia Barfield. It's the world's largest Ferris wheel. Okay, so there is no other Ferris wheel in the world that is bigger than this one. It's a really, really popular tourist attraction. So if you do ever visit London, then it is very much advised to try and book tickets for the London Eye in advance, because it is really hard sometimes to get tickets. It's located in a place called Jubilee Gardens, which is right on the south bank of the River Thames that runs straight through the centre of London. It's 135 metres tall, so it's pretty big. And it was created as part of London's celebrations for the millennium in the year 2000. The individual capsules that hold the people can have around 25 passengers each. So from the image, it looks like it's maybe not so large, but each of those capsules holds 25 people. So that's a lot of people. And you can get a beautiful 360-degree bird's eye view of the whole of London when you reach the very top of the journey. So it's a really, really impressive way of seeing London. And if you've never, ever taken the London Eye, then I would really, really recommend doing it. It's a really brilliant way of seeing the capital city. Okay, we shall move on and talk about one more very, very famous London-based attraction, and that is Big Ben. Now, a very, very common mistake that people make when talking about Big Ben is to use this kind of image. The image here that you can see is not really an image of Big Ben, but the Palace of Westminster at the bottom and Elizabeth Tower, which is the big tower which houses Big Ben. Big Ben is the name of the famous and large bell that strikes once an hour, every hour in the UK inside this tower. So Big Ben is actually the name of the bell, not the tower, not the building. So it's an interesting fact that lots and lots of people make mistakes with all the time, particularly tourists to the UK, although I'm sure there are many, many UK citizens who also are not quite aware of that. Originally, the bell was supposed to be called the Royal Victoria, but was later renamed. And in the 150th anniversary of the Elizabeth Tower, which is where the bell is stored, and the Great Clock, which you can see on all four sides of the tower, and Big Ben, the bell itself, was celebrated in 2009. And there were really big sort of parties and other events in London to commemorate this very historic building and the contents of. So that was also very, very interesting time to be in the UK. Sticking with London, we'll talk about one more very, very famous site that you will see if you've ever travelled around in London, which is the Big Red Bus. This is a really unique thing to London, actually. In other cities in the UK, buses are all kinds of different colours and shapes and sizes. But the way that this initially came about in London was that back in the early 1900s, many different companies competed for running bus services in the capital city. And one of those companies was called the London General Omnibus Company, and in 1907 decided that to stand out from the competitors, it would paint all of its buses bright red. And a little bit later, in the 1930s, when all of the transport in London was brought together by Transport for London, they decided that they would keep the famous red colour because it had become very famous and well known by London residents and by tourists and visitors as well. So if you ever do visit London, if you have been before, you may have noticed that these buses are very, very frequent. You'll see them all over the city. And if you haven't been yet and you're planning to go, have a little look out for them because you will see them everywhere. They're very, very famous, but only in London. Does anyone know of any things that are also famous from London? Can you think of any famous landmarks, places that you visited, tourist attractions, that kind of thing? If you have visited or would like to visit London, or perhaps you've seen movies that feature London as a backdrop, if you've got any places you can suggest that you would like to talk about, then please send us a message in the chat. Tell me something that you think comes to mind when you think about London. We'll spend a little bit of time waiting for some of your suggestions before moving on to the final topic of conversation for today. So what are the things that come to mind when you think about London? Can you think of any places, any famous landmarks that are particularly interesting to you when you think about visiting London? We talked already about places like Buckingham Palace, Westminster Palace, the London Eye, those kinds of places. But can you think of any more? If you can, send us a quick message and we will try and read out your suggestions. Okay, so in the meantime, whilst we're waiting for some more contributions, telephone booths, for example, the big red telephone boxes, they're very, very famous in many parts of the UK, but especially London. So that's a nice suggestion. As we're waiting for any more contributions, we'll move on to the final topic of conversation about the UK and the things that it's famous for. And this is perhaps something we don't think about so much, but the seaside. And there's a really, really important reason why visiting the seaside is such a common thing that British people do. Well, of course, the UK is an island and it's surrounded by water. And it means that in England, certainly, you are never more than 120 kilometres from the sea. So many people live within easy driving distance of the seaside. And in the UK, there are more than 60 blue flag beaches, which are beaches that are designated as having the highest quality status. Now, although we don't always think about the UK as having the very best weather, and it's definitely true, there are sometimes rainy and windy and cold days, but in the summer, when there is a really nice day, there are certain parts of the UK that have absolutely stunning seaside scenery. Especially my personal favourite, I think, would be the county of Cornwall in the southwest of the country. There are some absolutely beautiful beaches that I promise on a really hot and sunny day would look absolutely the same as beautiful beaches in Italy and the south of France. They're really, really beautiful places. So if you ever get a chance to visit British seasides, then I would highly recommend that you do. Cliffs, yeah, there's a really important kind of coastline in the south of the UK, in an area called a county called Kent, And there's a very famous city called Dover that has big, famous white cliffs that separate the sort of land and sea border between the UK and France. And they're a very sort of famous place, very sort of nice postcard image of the south of England, certainly. So yeah, absolutely. Okay, we are coming slowly to the end of today's webinar. At the moment, we're going to have a very brief live question and answer session. So if you've got any questions you'd like to ask about things in the UK, things that it is famous for, people, places, or you'd like to share your own stories of visiting the UK or having friends from the UK, then please feel free to share something in the chat and we will try and read out some of your suggestions. Okay, so I'll give you a small amount of time to do that and then we'll read out any of your contributions that we can. So if you've ever visited the UK or have any ideas for famous things that we haven't maybe talked about so far from the UK, then please feel free to share them with us. And we will try and read them out as we receive them. Excellent. We have done some holiday planning for Editor already. So maybe you've picked up some good ideas today for things to do in the UK if you are planning a visit at some point soon. So that would be a good idea. There are definitely some good suggestions. My personal one, check out Stonehenge. It's genuinely interesting. And get yourself to the beach in Cornwall especially. It's very beautiful. Okay, we are coming to the end of today's webinar. So if you would like to ask any questions, then now is your final chance to do so. Please feel free just to write as a comment, share your stories about visiting the UK with us, and we will end in the next minute or so. Okay, so I really hope that you enjoyed today's webinar about all kinds of famous things from the UK. If you've got any ideas for things you would like us to discuss in our next webinar, then please feel free to leave us a comment and we will try to accommodate your preferences. In the meantime, thank you so much for your time. It's been really great to share it with you. My name's Chris and I'll hopefully see you again on another webinar soon. Thanks very much, take care, and we'll see you again.